Okay, everybody, we will go ahead and jump in. Thank you for being here with us. It's 9:02, so we're going to go ahead and get started. It's great to see so many familiar faces today. Thank you for spending your Friday morning with us as we have a big meeting with a lot of important stuff to talk about. I'm really glad to have this group around the table to thought partner with. So this is our August 19th Educator Preparation Stakeholder Group meeting, and we're going to kick it off with some housekeeping. Just want to make sure everybody is aware that the meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded at the conclusion of the meeting. Make sure you mute your microphone unless you are talking. And please leave your camera on if possible. We try to engage with one another, and we certainly don't see each other often enough. So while we're in the same room, let's try to stay engaged and on camera. And if you would rename your Zoom with your name and organization, that would be helpful as we monitor the attendance. So for our agenda today, as always, I was watching an old recording and I say the same thing every meeting, but it's action-packed. We've got a lot to get through today. If that sounds familiar, it's because it is. These are always times that we talk about really high leverage, important, high impact content, and today is no different. So we are going to talk about Espec stakeholder engagement. Christy will lead that discussion around the future of the EPSG or EPAC, depending on how the board chooses to go forward, which certainly should include your voice. We'll also do a July Espec meeting update and just walk through the July meeting. We've got some great content coming today regarding the effective preparation framework, and I want to thank ahead Andrea Chevalier for stepping up to lead and help in that conversation. And then we'll talk about the special ed certification pathway update, which I know many of you are excited to learn more about. And then we certainly want to have time at the end of our meeting to answer any outstanding questions. I will say it's sometimes difficult for presenters to manage questions in two ways. One, in the chat, and two, if it's a question that's tangentially related, but not within the deck as we've got it presented, but being answered a little bit later. So if you do have questions, feel free to shoot those to me or put those in the chat, and I will bring those up at the most opportune point to answer them. My promise is they'll all get answered before we conclude today. Anything else as we kick it off? Otherwise, I'm going to pass it right to Christy.
Thanks so much, Emily. And I want to thank all of the members for allowing us to go from a 2-hour meeting to a 3-hour meeting. The last thing we want to do is ever cut off some of these important discussion items. You guys are rock stars when it comes to your input, and we need to make sure that we've given you enough space to do that. The first thing that we really wanted to get into is on the Espec stakeholder engagement. And again, this is going to be what your new name will be by the time that the Espec has made their final decision. This is something that Emily had presented, sorry, to you all at the May meeting. The board discussed it in July and asked that we dig a little deeper with you all, since we have had some more time to explore what those legalities are, what the rule text would look like, implications. And before the board makes a final decision, of course, they want your input. So just stay tuned, because at the end of this, I'm going to ask for your input that will be in the chat. But if you allow me to first walk through all of the implications, I think that will help us all have a better idea of what we're actually going to be making, choices on for the board's consideration. So just a little history that, again, I know we went through this at the May meeting, but the EPAC was established in 2006, just really with Edtpa programs as the primary source of representation. Every now and then we would have some other external stakeholders, but pretty much it was all EPPs. In 2020, started in 2019, where the board really kind of wanted to expand the representation, since all ed prep actually affects the entire teacher pipeline. So in 2020, the board expanded to 32 members. 22 were from professional organizations. 8 of those members are also employed with institutions of higher education. There are 5 members that represent only Ed Prep programs, 1 from an IHE, and again, because 8 of those from the professional organizations also, are employed by an EPP. There were 4 of you that are alternative certification programs, and then 5 members that are not affiliated with Edtpa programs, 2 nonprofit educational organizations, and 3 teachers. That is where we are right now. That is what the board approved in February 2020. This is how right now the cadence works, the process works. Right now, we support the Espec and you as EPAC members. As you know, that we send you the agenda book prior to a meeting, trying to note anything that may be of importance to you that you all may see or hear from us at a future meeting. You are all invited to place items on the agenda. TEA conducts the EPAC member meetings. After all the meetings, we also ask for feedback. But right now, the agendas are set by where the Espec has said, hey, we want to get more feedback on, certain items, certain topics. So please go fish with our EPAC. There are items that TEA staff are already working on that has not even been, mentioned to the board yet. It may be implementation of statute as a conclusion of a legislative session. And then also, as you know, that we allow you all to provide any, time to solicit, from y'all. Do y'all have any items you want us to discuss? Do you have questions? So this is how and where we get our agenda items right now. And how that also works throughout the process is that you all are asked to solicit feedback from your respective organizations or colleagues, and then bring that to EPAC meetings. And I know Jessica and Pam have got some great examples of that a little later. And then TEA embeds that feedback into agenda items discussed to make sure that we, with the EPAC and Espec meetings, just to make sure that that two-way dialogue is reflected not only to the Espec, but as you all are EPAC members, it is nice to see the fruits of your labor. So we hope that we will do that, and we would love to continue to improve on that. Here are some of those examples, right? This is where I really just wanted to highlight for you guys to see that you're really making an impact. You're making an impact to the field. You're making an impact to Espec, to TEA staff. There, these are just I've just pulled 5. That this is not an exhaustive list, but for instance, on the STR implementation, you all were crucial in ensuring that candidates that were in the preparation pipeline that needed to have completed all of their requirements before the new STR implementation, so they didn't get caught in that loophole. You guys were phenomenal in making sure that our candidates did not get caught. The reading specialist and school librarian, this is something been very recent. You all were great in providing nominees for the Espec's consideration on those standards. The EPF input, and again, this is something that I know that Jessica will dig in, but y'all have been so great in providing some of those high quality components that have been very valuable to the Espec, and I know to Dr. Rodriguez on the Espec. She has been very complimentary and thankful that this group has provided so much input. Senate Bill 1590 on the virtual observations. This is something, again, very recent where, we wanted to make sure the implementation of 1590 said any virtual observations need to make sure that it's as rigorous as in person. And you all were phenomenal in that input of what some of those components could look like. And then the Edtpa pilot and alternatives. The Edtpa pilot has been on a standing agenda item with this group, even before the board kind of redid the composition back in 2020. And then as well as bringing alternatives not only to this group for consideration, but those that presented alternatives had an opportunity to present at the December 2021 meeting. So we hope that what we provided for when we kind of rethought and reimagined what EPAC could do is that it is actually beneficial, and it's bringing fruits to the field as well to the board. So here is where we are, a little bit of the background in the history, is that there was a recent request submitted by Dr. Roselle, Dr. Anderson, and Dr. Ward. The recommendation was that Espec establish officers, chair, vice chair, and secretary, stating that there was a concern of lack of representation, allowing a vote to fill those positions, that the EPAC represent itself at Espec meetings, and then to coordinate with TEA staff to set agendas. Once we received that request, we got with legal and started, digging. And again, this is something I know that Emily had talked about at the May meeting, but I want to bring it back to the forefront. So to make sure that we're all on the same page, our legal counsel realized that EPAC is not in compliance with Texas Government Code Chapter 2110. And what that government code says is that any agency that establishes a formal advisory committee must hit, these criteria. All the committees have to be adopted into rule prior to meeting. There's no more than 24 members. Half of the members have to be from industry. The other half have to be from those that consult the agency, industry, or occupation. The presiding officer selected by the committee and reports directly to the board. Staff must report all the usefulness work and track all the staff hours. So we would just have to keep a running tally and then report it to the legislature every 2 years. We have to also report the purposed task. It must be prescribed. And then I can't see the last thing, sorry. What does that say? What's that last bullet say?
It must be reviewed every 4 years.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, sorry.
Thanks, Holly.
Thanks, Holly. So it takes some reporting, but this is what the government code actually tells us that we would have to do. And this is for every state agency that establishes an advisory committee. The great news is, I know I've already given you a sneak peek, but we just call this, Christie. We did not want, we had a choice. We either had to halt the work that the EPAC has already been engaged in, or legal said you can just change the name of the group from advisory committee to a stakeholder group, and voila, you guys are great until the board makes a decision of which path it wants to choose. So that's where we are today. That's why, y'all are all probably doing guessing games on what EPSG actually meant. We just changed advisory committee to stakeholder group. So here is what the board is faced with, and there will be a discussion item at the September meeting, is that to either continue with the EPSG, we will continue the work, we will continue the membership, and then staff will be able to provide any replacements through the same nomination process that we inherited. We started back in 2019, sorry. Or they can engage in rulemaking. That will mean Espec will adopt the rules to establish the EPAC in compliance with 2110. So those are the choices, and I want to walk through what the difference would be for each one. So on the left, this is going to be if they adopt EPAC as advisory committee, and then on the right side is if, what you're going to do, what the board would do if we kept it as the EPSG right now. And I really wanted to make sure that everyone was clear with what are the implications, what is the impact, when it's plugged in, what is it going to look like? And that, because whenever I ask y'all for your feedback, I I need to make sure that you have an informed decision before you start, giving us your choices. So on the EPAC, there's no more than 24 members, 12 have to be industry, 12 are consumers of services provided by the agency, industry, or occupation. Right now, we have 32 members. We have 22 from professional, 5 EPPs, 5 teachers, and nonprofits. So definitely will reduce the membership for the EPAC has to be approved at at an Espec meeting. So whenever members drop off or vacancies arise, members can only be added at a subsequent Espec meeting, right? If we kept it with the EPSG, nominations can continue, and then staff can determine replacements based on organizations, the EPPs, and nonprofits. This is kind of what we did, several years ago before we found out that we were not, statutorily, compliant, making sure that Espec had to approve those. The meeting facilitation for EPAC, it would be a presiding officer selected by the membership, would preside over each of these meetings. If we continue what we're doing right now, TEA staff under the leadership of the associate commissioner would continue those meeting facilitations. Espec reporting, the presiding officer under EPAC would report directly to the board. Right now, and what Espec reporting is that TEA staff, again, summarizes, distills, embeds that feedback into items. We do not, right now, we don't make sure that we have a consensus. We don't do voting. We just make sure that every voice, is heard when we are synthesizing that feedback. Purpose and task, right now, if we go back with the EPAC, that purpose and task has to be adopted in rule and outline that purpose and task of the committee. So the board would determine what that would need to look like. And then all the adopted rules to outline the process that the presiding officer reports to the board versus, the purpose and task of the current process of utilizing the committee for board related topics, in reporting to the Espec any feedback that we have solicited. Annual evaluation is required if we go with the EPAC. The annual evaluation has to be the work, the usefulness, and we have to track the staff cost of all the work that we have been doing throughout the year. And then we report the evaluation to the LBB biannually. Under the EPSG, there's no current evaluation. There could be updates to the board. That's something that, like I said, we embed them in items, but we could add staff updates, at the end of a year or however the board wants it, if that would be something that they would desire. An abolishment date, it is required in statute that EPAC automatically abolish after the 4th anniversary. And if the board decided to continue, they would just have to update that rule. But it cannot be any later than the 4th anniversary of when they adopt EPAC into rule. And of course, as you know, right now, there is no abolishment date. We've been rocking and rolling since 2006. And then on the agenda setting, even though that there's nothing in the government code that prescribes how the agenda would be set, the recommendation included a request that the agenda be set by the presiding officer along with TEA staff, and that staff provide materials used during presentations to that presiding officer. And again, right now, how we set the agendas is by a directive of Espec. TEA staff anticipating input and discussion items and action items, and wanting to make sure that we dig in with y'all, as stakeholders. And then again, you all are always allowed to request either agenda items or questions to make sure that we have covered at each of those meetings. So that is the world of what it would look like under an advisory committee, what it would look like if we stayed as a stakeholder group. And very important to this discussion are two issues. Number one, the two options cannot be combined. For instance, we can't go with EPAC or EPSG, but yet still allow, EPAC to directly report to the Espec. I know this was something that the board had asked, hey, can we kind of, mesh the two? And we cannot have a hybrid legally if we even start doing anything that reflects or aligns with what is in the government code of 2110. We have to do all. So it's either one or the other. The other implication is that even though EPAC is the only standing advisory committee, we, as you all know, have a lot of ad hoc. I know I do it every year on 232 for our continuing professional education, is where I get together, a group of, 25 stakeholders to really dig into our CPE rules. So what we would have to bring to the board is, do they want to do all of their advisory committees that way? And in that context, all advisory committees before we could bring you all together and get your feedback, that would have to be codified in rule. And just as a reminder, it takes about 9 months from start to finish to get advisory committees into rule. But this is something that the board is going to need to, have as their decision, point. So I just wanted to make sure that you all are going to be aware of what will be presented to the board at the September meeting as they make a decision and, give us directives. What the draft rule text shows right now, and this was also presented to the board at the July meeting, is if they decide to go with EPAC, is that the purpose and duties right now is to advise Espec on issues and regulations that may have an impact on educator preparation in Texas. The composition would be 20 members, 10 from EPPs and 10 from teachers, school administrators, and district employees. There would be a presiding officer selected by you all. The advisory committee chair will report directly to the Espec. And the timeline of that is that, again, September discussion, December would be a proposal, February adoption, goes to April, go to SBOE in April, and then would have a May to June effective date. All right, so now y'all can quit listening to me, because this is where I really need y'all to do some work here, is that I need y'all to indicate in the chat, I need your name, your organization, and that if you want the board to continue with EPSG and why, or do you want the Espec to create EPAC and why? Okay, I see a hand raised.
Yeah, hi, sorry, this is Carrie Griffith. I just wanted to ask quickly what you're thinking, what the agency's thinking was about having 20 representatives, even though statute permits 24.
We don't have a strong feeling. Whenever legal was drafting the rule and, working with Emily and making, looking at that balance, there is nothing that would prohibit us going from 20 to 24. We're not married to that.
It was a randomly sort of decided to have 20. I was just curious if there was some thinking behind that. So thanks for answering that.
You bet. So I'm going to take 5 minutes. If you all can put in the chat, and I'm going to, I'm not summarizing this. The board will see your name, your organization, and what path you would like them to choose, and any justification that behind that.
Christy, but can I ask a clarifying question that'll help? Well, can I just ask a clarifying question?
Absolutely.
So I regardless of the choice, I appreciate under the continue with the EPSG choice that the slide that talked about it would continue with the work that we're doing with the same membership. I appreciate that because I think people have invested in this and it wouldn't make sense to scramble that all up now. But then in a later slide and you talk about membership for the ESPG will come from nominations from the field. But the slide before that talked about nominations would be in the context of replacements. So in other words, when you say nominations will come from the field, you're talking about in terms of replacements, right?
Yeah, so great question. Whenever we started this this reorganization, recomposition idea back in 2019, we had a nomination process where all the organizations got to just name who their representative would be. And then those other 10 had, separate nominations from their, from the field. And of course, we had more nominations than we had for slots. And what the idea was going to be is for those that may have been nominated from an IHE or an ACP, that if somebody else drops off, we're not going to go fish. If there have been nominations and nominees that fit the criteria, but we just didn't have enough seats at the table at the time, we would pull from them. But we also did a 2 year and 3 year terms. So we could have those staggered terms. So those that would drop off in 2022, what the plan was going to be before this got brought up this spring would be by November of this year, those that were coming off in 2022, if it was a professional organization, would be us reaching out to them and saying, here's your representative from your professional organization. They have every right to renominate that same person or somebody else. I know throughout the year we had a couple of organizations where maybe the president of a certain organization, those terms kind of come off and their officers, change up, and they want to, remove the one president and put in the other, but we couldn't do that because only the Espec can approve any replacements or any membership. And so does that answer your question, Holly, or I don't want to keep going.
No, it does. I didn't want to confuse the issue of continuing with current membership with nominations from the field. I just wanted to clarify that any nominations from the field would only be in the context of replacing someone,
Yes, but again, once those terms have completed, so at the end of the 2022, if you're an IHE and your term ended in 2022, then we would go back and look at other nominees that are IHEs that don't have a seat at the table, so we can make sure that people who haven't had a seat at the table on this committee that represent either an IHE or an ACP or the non-EPP reps, those 5 are teachers or other professional organizations, that we keep allowing more and more voices from the field to come and have input at this very important committee. Okay, so does that answer your question, Holly? I have a couple more.
Yes, thank you.
Zach, I see that your hand was raised.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. I've got a couple of questions just to help me think through this clarification. Correct?
I can't.
Did I make that up?
I'll have to ask counsel about that. I don't remember seeing that. What I do remember is that in statute, I don't remember seeing in statute that it had those meetings have to be filed with the register the way that Espec meetings are. But I don't want to say that definitively and then be wrong. It would have to, where the board would have to determine what is the task and purpose. And we really haven't had an opportunity to really dig in. What exactly does that mean? Right? They would be able to decide, is the task only directives from them? Is the, so those are the things that we would still need to flesh out with them as they determine that task and purpose. But when it comes to the register, Zach, I don't know, but I will definitely find out.
Like I might have been mistaken on that. I also, the idea, one of the reasons I originally submitted that was to have kind of a direct conduit to the board. If we stayed with the stakeholder group and I was to testify on behalf of I Teach Texas, could I state that I also am a member of EPAC?
Absolutely.
Or the stakeholder group, but not representing the stakeholder group?
Yes, sir, absolutely. And we always encourage you all to share with the board that, you all are some of our most, I got to choose my words, man. It's Friday. Got to bear with me. Y'all are some of our most involved stakeholders. You are plugged into the board. You are plugged into all of the oversight provisions, all of the meetings, and y'all give us a lot of work, a lot of insight. Your input is so valuable. We welcome you when you stand before the board and say, I am, Dr. Zach Rizal, I teach, I'm also an EPAC member. I think that is absolutely more than appropriate. It is what Espec members, they cannot represent the board, but they are more than welcome to share with the public that they are also Espec members.
Thanks. And one final question. Do you know how many meetings under this current format that we've been at capacity?
Sure, I'm answering your question.
I want to be, when the board expanded, I think oftentimes it can be difficult for educators that are current practitioners to take away Friday mornings. And so I'm just wondering, when it expanded to 32 members, have we had, I believe the first meeting, it seemed really well attended because we did all those introductions. But since that time, have we had a full 32 members attend the stakeholder group? I'm just wondering what would happen if you limit the meeting a little bit and some of those practicing educators they don't have the accessibility all the time to take off, first week of school on a Friday.
It's a really good point, and I don't have those numbers. I
Okay.
can go back and pull the because we have all of the attendance. I know that for like Jessica's shop, she's been doing some of those subcommittee works. I know that there's things that what I have done, like when we were working on the clearinghouse, and Holly was integral on that, is that we would meet starting at, I think it was like 4 or 4:30. We were starting later in the day to ensure that our teachers, because that committee was composed mostly of our educators, and we absolutely want to make sure that they're in the field. But
Yeah.
I can do a rundown to see who's able to attend. It's kind of a hot shot from what I can remember right now, because sometimes it's heavy in y'all's conference seasons, right?
Right.
So when it's in the fall, y'all are like, yeah, you ain't getting me today, because there's just so many conferences going on. Sometimes in the spring, some of our teachers, because they're in testing, which is why we've tried really, really hard to really push the communication. This is something
Sure.
that we did not do prior to the 2020, is sending out the agenda, identifying topics that may be of interest to you, allowing you to know what's going to be on the agenda, where the Espec has asked for a little bit more of a dig. So we've really tried to plug you into the work, even because we know how incredibly busy you all are, and you all are not all paid to cover Espec as well as others. So but I can definitely do a rundown on that and see what the attendance has been for those 32 members.
So one other question, and then I'll concede my time. If it moved to the formal committee, then do Robert's rules of quorums for voting, does that come into place, or you'd have to have so many members attend, or is it still just a simple majority, or do you know? what the ramifications of that would be.
Yes, statute does not require there to be a quorum, does
Okay.
require Robert's rules. Again, I think that would be something, because it does say that Espec is to prescribe the purpose and the task. That would be something that the Espec would either be able to weigh in on, or it would be silent, and the committee under the presiding chair would be able to drive what those need to look like.
Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
You bet. Okay, Andrea, I still see is your hand up again? Or are you, I don't want to skip you going, which she just forgotten it was up there. So sorry, but I did want to make sure if you had a question.
Yes, thank you for allowing some discussion. I have two questions. So the first one is, so you had on the slide, a couple of slides back, for the EPSG, TEA can report to Espec, just the members can't. So it doesn't make it an advisory committee if y'all are just kind of summarizing what we've discussed.
No, and that's one of the things that I'm always thinking about, with what we're presented, are there ways for continuous improvement? And even though we embed in our respective items and, input that we've received from y'all, as I was thinking about this going, it may be a good idea. And this isn't something that we've weighed in with the board on this, but this is something that I will definitely, present to the board at the September meeting, is that if they want an annual, biannual, every meeting, hey, here are the topics that were discussed at the, EPSG meeting. Here's some of the feedback, here's some of the ongoing work. That is definitely something that I want the board to have an opportunity to give us some guidance on.
My second question was,
can I chime in there real quick? I'm sorry for interrupting, Andrea. I do think the guidance we got from Laura was that staff can't be a stand-in for a representative from the
Right.
EPSG to do like an EPSG update item, because that would be a proxy advisory committee. So we could continue to like name and stamp where within items we're sharing feedback from the EPSG, but it would be like embedded within items, and we could like put a little asterisk by it, but there wouldn't be a separate EPSG update item at each meeting.
okay. And would the meetings still be recorded where Espec members could access them if they wanted to, just voluntarily?
Yeah, I think it's always been really important for us to record these, and also for those members who aren't able to attend, to Zach's point earlier, sometimes y'all can only, attend part of it. Some, can't do any of it. So our expectation was that we would continue on the same cadence we have right now and the same processes.
Okay. My last question was regarding the proposed or the rule language that y'all had in the discussion item at the last meeting. So what was the reasoning behind not having any of the professional organizations in that suggested membership? Like, because I think the teacher, or at least I feel like as a representative of teachers that I could represent like some of the consumer side of that. But so I'm just wondering why the big shift in that particular proposal.
I can take that, Christy, if that's helpful. I think it was just a literal interpretation of the statute from the providers of the service and the consumers of the service, taking that on its face. That seemed to be the most natural answer to what the statute actually says. But again, as we said at the board meeting, that was for the board's feedback. If they want to interpret that differently and have representatives from the organizations fill those spots, that would be feedback they could give us. Same thing with having it's a maximum of 24 members. It doesn't say you have to have 24. There are 4 spots there that could be purposed for some group, or the whole list included in that rule could be changed. That was, again, when we bring draft language, it's genuinely for feedback. It's not for anything. It's a straw man for the board and public comment to respond to.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's Dr. Ward. I think you were next, and then I'm going to give just a couple more so I can give y'all some time to do your responses, and then I know that we need to move on. But Dr. Ward?
Hi, thank you. I wanted to ask, I know probably prior to our proposal about this, we had discussed the ability for organizations to designate a first alternate. Like, say, for example, I wasn't able to attend a meeting, but TechState could have someone who could attend in my absence. Has any thought been given to moving forward with that?
So are you saying if it sticks with EBSG versus EPAC?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so when we first started having conversations, whenever, before the request came, one of the concerns that we had is that some people were having to vacate their spots, and we did not want to leave that voice unheard. And so what we had suggested doing and thought about doing is bringing to the board that an updated EPAC list, but then also bringing them alternates to also approve. So in the event that the representative had to, leave that position or not be able to attend, somebody else can be there to make sure those voices are, but whenever that all happened at the same time, so we have not pursued that. I think, if the board says continue with the EBSG, then that's definitely something that we would rather have, but again, we can make that determination along with you all, because to me that's going to be the best. But what we don't want though is that, and we've had this a little bit where someone's like, well, I want so and so to go ahead and be my replacement, and then they both show up. So I don't. That'd be something that we'd have to discuss with y'all about, how y'all feel about that. Is that concerning? Do you really care? Whenever we were all in person, we had, EPAC members around a table, but, the public could attend. So we started really digging into what could what could it look like as we move forward with that continuous improvement mindset. Gina, I see your hand is up.
Thank you, Christy. So I'm just going to put something out there. This is nothing we can solve today, but just something for us to think about. It might be time for us to figure out what steps would be needed to change statute. The wording to me is contradictory to what we've been trying to accomplish over the last several years. We say things like, and you said it very well at the beginning of the meeting, Christy, that educator preparation involves all of us here today and even more people, because everything is so interconnected when we talk about educator preparation. The professional teacher organizations, alt-cert programs, teachers, administrators, institutions of higher ed. I mean, the lists go on, and that's what we've tried to capture in our current kind of EPSEG configuration. But to say that it has to be split between industry or occupation and consumers of services is everything we've been saying not to do, right? We know we have to partner across all areas of educator preparation. We know that every step along that continuum from preparation to in-service teaching, through professional development, through induction, all of that requires all of us to continue in those efforts together. And, we see sort of this disconnect between what we're trying to accomplish today as to how the teacher vacancy task force membership was developed. There are, big events across, the regions of our state, Dallas Regional Chamber, et cetera, where they, develop these amazing opportunities for people to serve on panels to talk about teacher shortage, yet there's very critical members of that process missing. So I just wanted to put that out there. I find it very sort of just difficult to work within these confines that we are trying to adhere to when we've worked so hard to change that paradigm and to change that narrative.
Gina, can I ask you what your recommendation would be, given we don't determine statute and don't lobby? So what would your recommendation be in this moment, given the guardrails of the game we are playing?
I wish I had a recommendation ready to share today that would be, articulate and reasonable and doable.
This is a safe space. It doesn't have to be articulate. You can spitball it, but just to try to, offer critiques with recommendations, I think is always helpful. So if you have an idea of how you would like staff to approach this, I think sharing that part would be as helpful as sharing your frustration.
Sure. I think that we have to start with the idea, we have to all kind of come to an agreement or continue this this message that everyone that's a part of that continuum in preparing teachers has a valid voice, and that it's as difficult as it is. This is the culture of teacher preparation in the state of Texas. We are very unique, and that to recognize that, first of all, to try to keep that at the forefront of our decision making and our shared governance and things like that. In this very moment for today's conversation and trying to move forward, I think that keeping more voices at the table is important. Yet I also feel that more shared rulemaking is important. So I feel like following the statute in certain parts is important, is what I would want to do, but then to also keep the variety and the number of voices at the table. So yeah, I would be for that splitting the elements apart, which I apparently is not possible. But I didn't give a solution, Emily. I apologize for that. Sometimes I'm a person that asks a lot of questions and I don't always have the answers, but sometimes those questions can help us moving, keeping the ideals in mind rather than forgetting them. That's where I'm landing today. So I apologize if I muddied the waters.
No, we love muddy water. We love low hanging fruit. We love all of that. And this is why I really wanted to have this thorough conversation with you all. And, I really want to go back to a couple of things that you had talked about, is that I don't want there to ever be the idea that EPAC is the only way to have a voice in Espec's decision-making, their rulemaking. There is 1,001 ways that we really hope that you will come to the board. There is nothing in statute, for example, there's nothing in statute that requires Espec to have, public comment at each specific item on an agenda. They don't have to do it at all. And, it's one of those things that we've really promoted that. This is why we spend so much time making sure that y'all are aware of what the board is considering. We always talk about the rulemaking process. We heavily suggest and recommend that you provide public comment during the public comment period. You provide testimony at the board. Your voice is so integral in what the board does, and that is why we get excited and we do what we do here. That's also why, several of us had started way before the 2019 decision-making, is how can we make EPAC more meaningful? And when you start looking at all of the board's oversight functions on those 3 pillars, we wanted to make sure that all of the voices that fall under those pillars of oversight have a voice at the table. And so, not to say there is not room for improvement, regardless of the path that the board takes. We definitely want to continue having conversations. What is missing? Right now, like I said, we've been very, purposeful in saying, here's what's going to be on the agenda. Is there anything else you want to discuss? Here's what the board, decided. So we've really tried to tighten those communication levers to make sure that you all feel the connectiveness with the board and what the board is doing. So I don't know if that speaks to some of what you're saying, or you're like, nah, I want to chop it up and do it. Well, congratulations. I mean, we are all in this together, and I think we can definitely get to a place where we are statutorily aligned, but having that feedback to the board is very important, which is why we took on the task, you got to be careful what you ask for. We had it at a point where EPAC was, where staff came and told you what the board was doing. See y'all later, have a great day, to where we've come now, right? Where it's expanded, it is all the voices. You have a voice in the agenda setting, subcommittee. So I won't get off on too much of an Oprah show or start preaching, but it's something that we feel very, it's a very personal thing, because y'all's voices are so incredibly important to us. And we want to make sure that we're doing everything to connect you to the board. But this isn't the only way. I don't want you to feel like if it's not one, you can't have that direct path also to the board in their rulemaking. Holly, I'm gonna take Holly, and then I'm gonna shut up, let y'all do your chat work, and then I'm gonna go to our next item. Go ahead, Holly.
So back to these terms you were speaking of that I reacquainted myself with, rediscovered, so to speak. So, some of them are 2021 to 22. Some of them, I know they're staggered, 2021, 23. So when are those up? Are those up at the end of that calendar year, or can you clarify that?
Say that one more time. I don't think I'm following what specifically you're talking about. You're talking about on the government code 21.
No. On our, when we were named to this stakeholder group.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We have terms, and some of them are 2021 to 2022, and some are 2021 to 2023. So what does that mean? Does that mean at the end of the calendar year for 2022, for example, or at the end of the calendar year for 2023?
Yeah, great question. So if you remember, it was in 2019 is when the board said, let's redo this thing. And that whenever the board makes those terms, it's at the February board meeting. So it will go through a calendar year. So like I was stating earlier, is that what the plan was going to be before we got gifted with this is at, November of this year, we would send back out to those organizations and to those, whether it be EPPs or the non-EPPs, opening back that nomination process, because as you recall, it was going to be 2-year staggered terms or 3-year staggered terms. But it's calendar year. Okay, so I'm going to shut up. I'm going to give us 5 minutes, unless you guys have all been doing it anyway, but I'm still going to give us 5 minutes. Do y'all need 5 minutes? I'm gonna give you 4 minutes. At 10 o'clock, I'm going to go to the next item. But while y'all are doing that, I'm just going to let you know, just to show this is what's going to be the next steps, is that, again, I'm putting all the raw feedback in the agenda item for Espec members. They will discuss and give us their, at the Espec meeting. So you're also welcome to, come and, testify, as you always are. And then whatever they decide, whatever path that they choose at the September meeting, I will wrap back and, let you all know what the board has decided.
Christy, this is Casey. I'm so sorry I couldn't find the little hand emoji thing. Sorry, so I just raised my hand. In our, I guess, vote or response, for example, my response, I'm a little torn because, and you'll see when you look at the chat, my thought is that teachers, organizations that represent teachers, organizations that represent administrators, that we would be consumers. So administrators hire teachers who are products of EPPs, and teacher candidates are consumers, and that they decide which EPP that they want to invest their time and money with to help them prepare. So in that sense, I would like it to be a formal, the second option. But if that, I don't know, if the agency doesn't, is there a term in code, in Texas Education Code, that defines consumer?
You know, again, going back to Emily's point, we took just that direct statutory language. It could be up to the board to determine and define what that, you know, needed to look like. We haven't dug into that. Like I said, we just took the straight statutory language, and from there, you know, that's just how it was reflected when this was drafted. So that would be a discussion, you know, a discussion point. I don't know if there's statutory language that, you know, determines the consumer. We took the straight language. So I don't have a definitive on that, Casey. That'd be something that I think the board would have to consider.
I do think, Casey, if you feel strongly about that and of other members do, there's a place where you could submit a comment with a revised or alternate makeup for an EPAC that meets the criteria the way you perceive it.
And maybe I can just add that to my recommendation. Is it's not a straight option A or option B until we know what could be included as a consumer. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this is why I really wanted to expand to 3 hours, because my colleagues would be hitting their electric shock collar for me to move on more quickly, since I've now taken an hour of your very valuable time. But I think this was an important discussion. Y'all's input is going to be very valuable to the Espec. So thank you for all of your work and your input in chat. Okay, so I wanted to give you all the July meeting update. Why is it blank? Is y'all's blank? Yep.
Maybe animated.
Because I didn't click. Yep. Okay, the first thing that they did is they adopted 232, which just says that an educator that's on a board order must be in compliance with that order to renew their certificate. 230E adoption, the high school courses for an educational aid certificate. They approved the 241 proposal, which implements HB 159 for students with disabilities for a principal certificate. They approved Teach at Dallas College as a new EPP. They also approved the A+ Texas Teachers Agreed Order, their conditions for continual approval. They approved the Bilingual SPED Education Standards Advisory Committee, and this is to implement House Bill 2256 to create that Bilingual SPED certificate. I'm going to pause and allow Jessica to give an update on the work session.
Good morning, everyone. Great to see everyone today. An update on in our July meeting, the Espec held a work session the afternoon before the formal July Espec meeting. And the topic of that work session was a focus on teacher performance assessment and an initial discussion with the Espec around decisions in front of them and next steps as an outcome of the SBOE's decision in June related to implementation of Edtpa. The board during the meeting had an opportunity to reflect on the discussion coming out of the SBOE meeting, receive an overview of the decisions in front of them as they consider next steps, and they had an opportunity to review a number of potential proposed options moving forward. The board also had an opportunity to hear from a panel of representatives across Educator preparation program and LEA representatives, including some of you who are on the call today, and engaged in a robust discussion. Moving forward, at the September Espec meeting, there will also be a work session to continue the conversation coming out of that July work session. We also intend, as an outcome of that September work session, recognizing that there's an opportunity for further clarification and direction from the board coming out of that September meeting, we do intend to activate and lean on the working group. I believe it was previously known as the Alternative Performance Assessment Working Group that many of you on the EPSG had registered for. And so we intend to activate that working group to provide additional insight and feedback for the board moving forward as well. So more to come on this topic. Again, there was a really rich and robust discussion in July. I intend to continue that rich and robust discussion in September as the board sets their direction moving forward. Liz, I see your hand raised. A question I can answer for you?
Yes, so you mentioned that there will be another work session like the July meeting. Would that be in the previous format where it would be Thursday afternoon, the 29th?
That is correct, Liz. So yes, it will be the Thursday before the formal board meeting.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, Chrissy, then I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, this is my handoff to Dr. Olafson. I know that, as you know, that the board did approve the Chapter 229 proposal, which is the ASAP and the manual updates. And I know that Dr. Olafson wants to give you an update on what the board actually proposed.
Thanks so much, Christy. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you all out there. Just a brief highlight about what the board approved a proposal there for Chapter 229. So what shaped these updates? Why are we doing updates to 229? Well, there were some updates to other rule chapters. We got input. We also, legislation has happened. And also every year we run these calculations. We find the opportunity to work through our manual and work with preparation programs and reporting. We find opportunities to clarify and just do things a little bit better. And of course, then we are responsive to discussions by the Espec and of course action by the SBOE, particularly around Edtpa. And of course, feedback from y'all and also our ad hoc data working group. So on the next slide here, we had a discussion item all the way back in April, and then we did have to make a few changes between that and proposal. Key to those changes, of course, is removing Edtpa, the timeline to introduce Edtpa into the accountability system due to the SBOE's action there. Also, that meant that we had to change our definition of pedagogy test because we're moving to be able to align our indicator pass rates with the test figure. And then we also added the ability to allow the Espec to require sanctioned EPPs to post notice on their websites. That came out of the Espec's discussion related to the agreed order for A+ Texas teachers. And then of course, we also include the approved innovation EPP commendation category that had been decided upon by the board's committee. On the next slide, just a high level of these categories of updates. So on the next one, I think this has animation too, Christy. Yep, see? Yeah. So at a high level, for what's going on with our certification tests and calculations, we're introducing the language content pedagogy tests and pedagogy tests into the language of the rule. Right now it's PPR and non-PPR. And the reason why we're doing this is so that it aligns with the testing figure, and you can clearly go to the testing figure and see which column the test is in and know which pass rate it counts in. This gives us good alignment across rule chapters. Now, doing that, that means that the PASL will move. That's the only one that's going to move from being a non-PPR test to now being included in pedagogy tests. So we make sure that we give a nice timeline for that. So that won't happen until 2023-24. So it'll remain where it is for when we're doing the calculations this year and when we're doing the calculations next year. And then we'll also be clarifying on 291 and 391 to ensure that candidates are not double counted. On the next slide, talking about the clinical teacher data collections. So we shared this with the board, of course, a couple of times. Currently, there are some pieces of information that are not reported or reported differently depending upon the clinical experience model, be that clinical teaching or an internship for candidates. And so where we're going with this proposed future state is that we would, that preparation programs will also provide the district, of course, alternative certification programs already provide that for internships. We'll now be asking for that for clinical teaching, same thing, content and grade level, and then getting information about who the mentor and cooperating teacher is. This will allow the Espec to just frankly have better information and make better decisions about clinical experiences, which we know are very high leverage. It'll also allow us to provide educator preparation programs with information and insight on our forthcoming dashboards about what's going on with your folks who are out in the field. Where are they at? Who are they working with? What are the certifications? All of those types of pieces. What are the district characteristics? So we're really excited about that. And of course, it's also a nice place for preparation programs to be able to store and index and have access to all this information that I know does come up in 5-year audits. So it's all that data will just be right there. So on the next slide, we worked with the data working group with our stakeholders here to design this collection. Really gave us some good guardrails and some look-fors and helped us shrink this collection and emphasize that one of the key pieces that will also be simplifying the observation reporting. Instead of repeating the same information over and over, you'll just report that once, and then when the observation itself is reported, it'll be just, kind of the smaller subset of information. Another thing that we heard is that it will take time to gather TEA IDs for cooperating teachers and mentor teachers. So we've left that optional for the forthcoming year to allow time to build capacity and get that data. I will just note, I'm kind of doing my 229 run through right now. We did have a question specifically about this, and I will let you know we are going to circle back to it at the end of this meeting and dive in a little bit deeper about what this collection looks like. But so we'll look, this is one of the elements that we'll bring into the Espec. On the next slide here, we've got our sanction procedures updates. Key to keep in mind that none of this affects the due process that is available to educator preparation programs that may be up for sanctions with the board. This just kind of moves a little bit around the board's abilities here, and this is based on feedback from them, giving the ability to go towards revocation immediately if there is a violation. This allows the board to quickly address severe problems. As noted, our due process remains in place. Also gives the Espec can say that EPPs have to provide staff with verification that they are indeed doing what they said they would do. This came up in, we were looking at drafting of some agreed orders and wanted to make sure that we're clear that the Espec can do this. And finally, allowing the Espec to require sanctioned EPPs to post notice of such on their website. The next section is small group reset. I think we've shared this with this group before. In the past, when we had indicators go report only, we reset the small group aggregation process. Since all of our indicators have been report only, we plan on doing that again for all of our indicators. On the next slide, the commendations, talked a little bit about this. We're shifting one of the commendation levels down just to make it a little bit more attainable for preparation programs. We're updating our calculations, and then we're inserting language to clarify that you can get commendations in individual categories. You don't have to meet the threshold for all the commendation categories in order to get a commendation. And then finally, our ASEP manual cleanup work that we're doing, where we will simplify and clarify language. I am taking out all the footnotes because footnotes make me sad and are also a formatting nightmare. So we are inserting them into the text instead of being footnotes in the manual. We're updating dates. We're removing outdated language, updating our examples, clarifying our population for indicator 3. And then the last thing that we're doing is SB 2066 from the last regular session. Shifted language around a way previously population that had been previously called English language learners to be emergent bilingual learners. And so we are shifting the language around there. That's it as far as what's happening in 229. So on the next slide, our next steps.
Dr. Olafson, I think Dr. Ward has got her hand up. I don't know if you want to.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't see.
That's what I'm telling you. You're good.
Yes, just a quick question on the commendations. We had discussed at one meeting, potentially having kind of a longevity commendation, like for consistent performance at a certain level. Is there any thought or update on that, Mark?
Yep, really appreciate that, Dr. Ward. And I think that we would like to continue to rough that out with both internal and y'all, and be able to bring, if we get to a place that we like on that, be able to bring that in our next round of updates so that we're fully informed, have it fully fleshed out. And when we come because we bring this stuff every year, so we really do always have a really good opportunity to bring that in. But yeah, no, that's definitely on our radar. And then Holly, I see you have your hand up. Sorry, I got my screen up now.
Yeah, I just, would you remind me what the clarifying the population for indicator 3 was?
Absolutely. So what we did is we went in and we had, gotten to have some conversations about what all teachers are included in indicator 3. And the big thing here is that we set a minimum number of students in the teachers' classrooms. So again, indicator 3 is that measure of the growth of students in the classrooms of beginning teachers. We've got 2 years of report-only data before it goes live. So we do have the opportunity to really see, and the field will also have the opportunity to see how the numbers come in on this. We created a model with the 18-19 data that we did have, and that methodology was approved by the board. Just in further discussions with folks as we had released that data and people had started to look at it, we had some questions come up about minimum sample size, and we looked at some models and talked to some people, and that made a lot of sense. And so the big change here is that instead of we set consistent with small group size that we see elsewhere in the rule, we set a small group size of the number of students in the classroom. So it will only be those teachers with that have 10 measures or more that are included in the calculations.
And that was based on, for that particular indicator, or was that just the number you've used for other indicators?
Yeah, so we kind of consistently use 10 as a small group when we're doing stuff.
Okay.
So our next steps here is that we will, of course, this will go for public comments and an adoption item, and it'll be an adoption item at the September meeting. I think I am going to propose that maybe we take a quick break. I don't know, we've kind of been doing this for a minute now, so maybe we could take I don't know, do folks want to do a 5-minute break and then come back? Look into Christy on this.
Yes, sir. You have read our mind. So we are going to take a 5-minute break. We're going to hand off to allow Jessica to dig into this next item. So feel free to hang out or, do whatever you need to do. Fill up your cup of coffee, but we'll see y'all in 5 minutes.
And to name, I see some folks put their input on stakeholder group in the chat, but not all. So if you wouldn't also mind taking that additional few minutes to make sure that your input and your voice is heard in the chat on the stakeholder group. Thanks
Thank
all.
you, Chris.
All right, y'all, I'll give folks a second to come back into the meeting. Hope if you hadn't yet had the opportunity to do so, that you put your perspective related to the EPSG or EPAC decision in the chat. And now I wanted to take the opportunity to transition to the next topic on our agenda for this morning, which is the effective preparation framework update. Just to reground back a little bit in the purpose and goals in the development of the effective preparation framework. Again, the consistent emphasis from the board, from you all as a group, and from staff and other stakeholders in the field has truly been this desire and the goal of making the effective preparation framework a framework for the field by the field. In order to execute upon that vision, really, as we've discussed with members of EPSG and other stakeholders throughout the development process, really reinforced how the framework's been grounded in evidence-based best practices that Texas EPPs have leveraged and really exemplified in their practice to date. So really grounding in a research foundation, grounding in those evidence-based best practices. We've also had an opportunity throughout the EPF development to date to learn from EPPs across Texas who have been implementing these research-based best practices, having truly benefited from the expertise of folks who serve within this group. As you've shared your perspective in the development of the effective preparation framework. And as we share shortly, we've also had the opportunity to leverage voices of additional stakeholders to provide further input, and then have already begun and will continue to as we go through the iterative process of developing and refining this framework going forward to seek feedback from stakeholders across the state. And so that's work that we intend to continue throughout the fall as we work to develop and finalize the framework. In the development of the effective preparation framework, there's been a few core goals and tenets that have consistently driven conversations with the working group and also conversations across other stakeholders. One of those core tenets has really been a focus on codifying or putting our stamp around foundational best practices. We recognize that there are many, many practices that strong preparation programs engage in on a daily basis to generate strong outcomes for their candidates and the students that they serve. Really, the intent of the framework is to really put some stakes in the ground around those most foundational practices and really hit a level of specificity that reinforces those foundational best practices while still allowing for enough flexibility for innovation in the field and flexibility in terms of the pathway to implement those foundational practices. To that end, in some of our initial discussions with the EPF working group, we shared some of the language in the effective schools framework. So again, that's the analogous framework for K-12 that codifies effective school practices. And we shared some examples of what the effective schools framework currently looks and sounds like as an example of the level of specificity and foundational practice that we would aim to codify within the effective preparation framework. So an example here on the slide is what we call an essential action within the effective schools framework. So you can see the level of specificity where they've clarified and frankly where they have not clarified within the effective schools framework to really allow for multiple pathways towards innovation and quality under the umbrella of school leadership. We'll give folks a second to take a look at that. So again, a first kind of guiding tenet around hitting the right level of specificity and really coalescing around those foundational best practices. A second, a consistent discussion amongst stakeholder groups in the development of the effective preparation framework has really been a focus on building strong partnerships. So you'll see as we move forward and share the next round draft of the effective preparation framework, that there is a consistent through line around partnership and the recognition that collaboration across many entities ultimately yields strong, well-prepared teacher candidates that impact the diverse student population across the state. Gina, I'm thinking back to your comment earlier today about how it really takes a broad, diverse cross-section of entities to really lead to highly effective preparation. And so really kind of thinking that as a cornerstone in the development of the EPF as well. And then a third development goal with the effective preparation framework has really been consistently grounding back in this concept of the effective preparation framework defining the aspiration. So envisioning the effective preparation framework as really defining what effective EPPs strive to consistently demonstrate on a day-to-day basis in their implementation. Really defining a vision that's a North Star that allows for all preparation programs, even those who, the Espec or the field would consider our most effective, highest performing preparation programs, can identify something within that framework to consistently strive for and focus on in their continuous improvement efforts. To really see this framework as an opportunity or an avenue to support all programs in their continuous improvement journeys. With that in mind, you will see within the draft content of the effective preparation framework that truly it is an aspirational framework, and that's been a consistent discussion with members of the EPSG working group and other stakeholders. I would name that one consistent question that we receive that we've discussed in the working group and then have also discussed with other stakeholders has been, if the framework is capturing our North Star, our aspirational goal around what effective preparation in Texas looks and sounds like, what are therefore the implications for the Espec's rules and accountability mechanisms? And so again, naming that the intent of the effective preparation framework is really to recognize strong preparation program practices and support this ecosystem of continuous improvement. Also recognize that there's an opportunity for the Espec, once they've put some stakes in the ground around this vision for quality, to have the opportunity to step back and reflect on their rules and alignment. And we think about this across a number of different potential considerations. Once there's some clear stakes in the ground around components of quality, there's an opportunity for the Espec to say, are there requirements in our rule that in no way align with our vision for quality, and therefore do we need to continue to have those requirements be in place? We might also recognize that there may be rules currently on the books that might actually serve as barriers for some of the effective or innovative practices that EPPs are striving to implement. And then there might be opportunities, again, thinking about TAC or Espec rules as sort of the foundation for preparation programs. Are there opportunities to identify areas to fine tune that foundation to better align with the vision for quality? But again, thinking about the effective preparation framework as this North Star to support all programs in their continuous improvement. And then our administrative code, our Espec rule, is that foundation to ensure that our candidates across the state are getting effective and equitable preparation. To that end, truly the vision for at the direction of the Espec is really to think about leveraging the effective preparation framework as a mechanism to truly support continuous improvement and growth and recognition of quality preparation practices. Really that theory being, if there's a shared vision of those educator preparation program high leverage practices, it creates those opportunities for preparation programs in partnership with their partners to reflect on the current state of their practices, prioritize areas for continuous improvement, connect to high quality resources, tools, and supports, and that are already in the field and that could be developed as an outcome of the development of the effective preparation framework, and ultimately take action to implement those continuous improvement priorities. Thinking about sort of this flywheel of continuous improvement. We think if that ecosystem is in place, then there truly is an opportunity for preparation programs, candidates, and LEA partners to increase those high quality outcomes. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Weatherington, to talk about the stakeholder engagement to date.
Thanks, Jess, and good morning, everyone. Always great to be with you. So just in terms of the stakeholder feedback, so the last time this group met, which was in May, we spent a great deal of time of really reviewing the EPF, the feedback that you all had collected from your respective groups and your EPP colleagues. And this group also provided some really great additional feedback for the EPF so that it could be revised. And so after that meeting in May, then staff and TNTP, one of our colleagues and partners in this work as well, revised the EPF to reflect this group's feedback so that the EPF working group, a subset of this group, 13 members strong, I should add, could then further revise, take that set of levers and their essential actions and key practices, could then further revise and refine the EPF between the months of June and July. That says May. I misspoke there when I typed that. It's actually June through July, and then coming up in August as well. I want to take just a moment, and if you're a member of the EPF working group, will you please raise your virtual hand? I think it's important that we acknowledge your hard work and really celebrate your hard work in this space here. So thank you for those of you that have served on this committee, this working group, and also for raising your hand. So for those of us that are kind of on the periphery here, for the work that you're doing, we just thank you all so much. And so if you all, if you like just to kind of virtual applause would be fantastic as well for this esteemed group. We appreciate that. So the EPF working group spent hours, I'll say hours, engaged in both asynchronous and synchronous work during the summer. That's a big deal, y'all. Spent their summer doing this so that the EPF would be ready for the EPP feedback sessions that occurred in August 11th and on August 15th. So in terms of our additional next steps for stakeholder engagement, on August 30th, the group that just virtually raised their hand, the EPF working group, is going to have an opportunity to review the next iteration of the EPF that's going to be representative of the feedback that we collected from the EPP feedback sessions in August, so that the EPF would be ready for both Espec's review in September at their meeting at the end of September. They can give us guidance on and further feedback around, but it's also going to be, we want it to be ready for all EPPs across Texas as we distribute and release our statewide survey also next month. And then finally, we're going to round out our stakeholder engagement with CSOT members at their October conference. Really good opportunity to just further engage the field, or again, for the field, by the field, engage the field on the EPF. And then, of course, we have this vision, this benchmark of being able to share the final draft with the Espec at their December meeting and additional feedback or guidance that they may have on the EPF. Just if you'll go to the next slide. Thank you. We have asked one of our EPF working group members, Dr. Andrea Chevalier, to share a bit more about the extensive work that this group has engaged in to refine the EPF. I also want to just note as well and open up the floor after Andrea shares her perspective and the work that this group has done. There are other members that would like to just give voice to the work and from your perspective and what you all have engaged in with your organizations, your EPP colleagues to then support this work specifically in the EPF working group. I invite you also to share. So with that, Andrea, I'm going to turn it over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you. And once I'm done, anybody else who was involved in this, please feel free to jump in. So as was mentioned, we've met a few times, and the way that those meetings were structured were that we worked on one or two of the levers at a time, and we looked at the feedback that had been given by EPAC members. On those, it was sort of synthesized in each of those documents, and we got to go through and kind of think about what made sense and what didn't, and what might be something that's a lot more detailed that could be sort of like in a guidance document, what could be something that would maybe be in a definitions document. So we kind of worked on developing what this would look like from the perspective of a practitioner and someone who was going to eventually consume this and try and use it. And I would like to say that this process has been so wonderful to be a part of, to collaborate with others. And it's been really interesting. I've never been involved in anything before like this, like that's been so organic in the way that it just sort of like developed I mean, we had a little bit of structure in the beginning from those beginning documents, and the meetings were facilitated by TNTP. But just being able to work together, I think that that's all, or it serves as a really good model for stakeholder collaboration moving forward. And so I've really been honored to be a part of that. And I'll pass it off now to anyone else who wants to add.
Yeah, Andrea, thank you for that. And I think if you wouldn't mind, let's take a peek into that LEVER curriculum that's representative of the work that you all have done. So we wanted to give you all an opportunity to see just an example, and I'll throw in the chat as well. I meant to do that earlier, so let me grab that link for you all. Do you have access to the latest iteration? Let me find where.
Hey, Pam, as you're grabbing that link, I see that Dominique also raised her hand to be able to share her perspective too.
Thank you.
I just want to share that it's really been a pleasure and a privilege to work with this subcommittee. And I say that with the intent that for a long time, lots of us have been doing this work. I think we are finally focusing on what is very clear and very direct in terms of guidance, which I see as a theme that has run through all of the work that we've been doing to try to really codify this. I think the other thing that's really very helpful for me is I find myself, being a community member and working for a nonprofit, kind of being in this role between what do our EPP faculty and staff perspectives, where do they live, where do our LEA perspectives live? And so because I'm kind of in that middle space, this has been a really helpful exercise for me to be able to really push and say, are we being as clear and as direct? Are we leaving nothing to chance or interpretation? And I think that is so helpful in the way that we've approached this. And so I just thank everybody who's been engaged in it, because to me, that's the value of the discussion and us coming together, has been really just trying to get it as clear as possible, because we know it will offer such huge opportunity across the state for everybody.
Hey, Gina, thank you. Please feel free to share.
I just wanted to add to what our two colleagues have started with, and to say too that what I really appreciate about this framework is that it was organic, but it also really aligns well with what the current literature and research also states about quality educator preparation. And then also, again, underscoring that word quality and not quantity or compliance. That's what this aligns with national accreditation types of standards. And so I really see this as a true advancement and enhancement of how we've looked at educator preparation from the past. And so I just appreciate, first of all, the acknowledgement that this important work was needed, and that so many stakeholders and people that care deeply about the quality of educator preparation contributed to the framework. So thank you, Pam and team, for recognizing the importance of this work.
Thank you, Gina, and thank you, Dominique and Andrea, for sharing. I would just echo everything they've said. This has been such a powerful, transformative process that's all anchored to what we want, what's best in ed prep, which is just high quality, consistently demonstrated. So thank y'all so much for your feedback. I did drop in the chat, you all, the most updated version that the EPP feedback sessions, in those sessions that those folks were able to review, give additional guidance around. And so you'll see those there. But we can go to the next slide, Jess, please. Thanks. Okay, to round out, and again, thanks to everybody for all of your work on this. This has just been fantastic. Before I turn over to Jess, she's going to round out the day for us and discussing the special education certification pathway. I wanted to take just a few moments to just kind of unpack a little bit around those feedback sessions so that you all were very aware of what occurred in those feedback sessions. So the first, I did note that August the 11th from 1 to 4, and then we had about 25 EPP representatives who received Espec commendations. So they reviewed the EPF, provided additional feedback, and then we did the same thing again on August 15th from 1 to 4 with about 25 attendees that represented the very diverse landscape across Texas for EPPs. And then the EPPs that attended these feedback sessions were asked prior to coming to the feedback sessions to review these updated levers, which you've seen those in the chat. You've dropped them in the chat for you. And then these questions that are listed here is what we posed to the group and really generated, Jess also led a breakout session, I did too, and some of our other colleagues, that generated a ton of really rich feedback that we know that the EPF working group will be excited to take a look at. And also then just further refine, I'd say, the EPF. I will also acknowledge too that during these feedback sessions, I think, Gina, to your point, that EPPs were saying this is representative of what we know to be anchored to research and evidence-based practices, and this is what we are demonstrating. And I heard a lot of EPPs saying this is actually what's on our radar for this upcoming academic year to aspire to begin, to really be intentional around demonstrating, et cetera, providing support for our candidates and around certain areas. And so really, really rich discussions there. And just in terms of our next steps, a couple of things I do want to note for you is that we would love for you all, you have the most latest versions there in the chat, love for you all to review the updated levers and share with your EPP colleagues and professional orgs. But I do want to caution you that we're still in draft phase. We shared that with the EPPs that we met with just last week and the week before in the feedback sessions, that this is very drafty still. And so certainly appreciate the feedback around the drafts. And then also, like I shared a few moments ago, we are looking forward to engaging the Espec at their September meeting and really just seeking their guidance. We know that there are many members, if not all members of the Espec, that have said on multiple occasions how excited they are about the EPF, excited about the movement for this EPF, excited about the engagement that's been conducted to date for the EPF. So really looking forward to having what I believe Dr. Rodriguez named at the last Espec meeting or meeting before that is having a robust discussion for this particular topic and item. So with that, Holly, I did see your hand raised. Before we turn over to Jess, see if there's anything related to the EPF that you wanted to ask.
No, I figured out what I was going to ask. I appreciate it. I got on the link that you sent to look at the different levers, and I was actually thinking these levers they were kind of arrived at organically as well. I mean, I'm kind of going back in time here, but just as setting some groundwork here, these levers, didn't they kind of materialize as a result of sort of our initial stab at these conversations? Yes. Or can you remind me?
No, absolutely, Holly. They actually stemmed from one of our earliest jam boards when we started brainstorming the components of quality, and we bucketed the themes, and these were sort of the sort of highest level summary of the types of trends and topics that folks focused on. So definitely flowed organically from y'all's priorities.
All right, well, thanks y'all so much. Jess.
Thanks, Pam, appreciate it. And just want to say just how much we appreciate the feedback and input of everyone on this call today around the development of the framework so far, and to further stamp Pam's reinforcement that this is still still a draft, and there are probably multiple iterations of this work to come, and continue to look to I'm excited to look towards the continued organic collaboration with everyone here as we continue to refine this tool so it continues to best reflect the quality work happening across the state. As we transition, our final topic today is a discussion around our special education certification pathway. And this has been a topic that has been on the radar of Espec for quite some time now, thinking about opportunities to refine our special education preparation and certification, really stemming out of the adoption of new special education and deaf-blind educator standards. And so wanted to take an opportunity. There was intended to be a discussion item on this topic on the July agenda, and due to time, we didn't have an opportunity to actually discuss this with the Espec, but they did have this as an agenda item within their board book for their review. We will be sharing this update with the Espec, therefore in September. So wanted to have an opportunity to really share this content with you all as well, solicit your feedback, and just to name that this will be a continued conversation with the board as we move forward. Just to set some groundwork or context around special education production trends in the state. We know that special education teacher production is consistently an area of focus in educator preparation, and really a consistent hiring need for our LEA partners. And it has been pretty consistently identified as a critical shortage area. When we look at the production of special education teachers historically, what we've seen is that a certification by examination has actually been the largest producer of special education certification holders as we look back all the way to the 2013-2014 academic year. And as a reminder, in our certification by exam pathway, there's no requirement of any additional preparation before sitting and taking that exam once you already hold a certificate in a foundational content area. In addition, what we've seen in terms of production trends, that overall production of special education certified teachers has rebounded in 2021 after the 1920 academic year dip. Then finally, just again, setting context for this group and the Espec around our attrition rate, which for 21-22 was sitting at about 35%. We do intend at the board meeting to kind of set the foundation of where we've been in terms of a special education redesign and our deafblind certification pathway, really recognizing that this work really began in earnest all the way back in 2018 with the Espec, really with the development of TEA's special education strategic plan, which led to a series of forums that were held in 2018, 2019, really digging in to our special education policy in Texas. That led to the establishment of our special education and deafblind educator standards advisory committees. And since that time, we've had opportunities to discuss special education with this group, and have also established through CEDAR, who's a National Technical Assistance Center with a specific focus on special education, a state leadership team that has a specific focus on providing guidance related to special education, both in terms of policy and practice. And happy to share more context around that group as well. And so really thinking about the multiple years of feedback and layered context and acknowledgement of our circumstances on the ground when it comes to special education teacher preparation. We're now bringing forward to the Espec a set of initial recommendations related to a redesigned special education certification pathway. So the proposed updated special education and new deafblind certification pathways includes 3 certification pathways. The first proposed pathway is the establishment of a new special education specialist EC12 certificate in replacement of the current special education EC12 certificate. The standards that would inform the development of the certificate would be both the special education EC6 and the special education 612 standards. And it would necessitate the development of a special education specialist EC12 exam with an anticipated launch of September of 2025. The aligned training requirements would include aligned coursework hours and training for the certification field in which the candidate was pursuing their initial certification. We anticipate that the majority of teacher candidates would pursue both special education and content area certifications. I'll name for folks that if you've been consistently engaged in discussions related to the special education certification pathway, you'll note that the Educator Standards Advisory Committees recommended the development of special education EC6 and special education 6 through 12 standards. In subsequent engagement with special education educator preparation program leaders who with a focus on special education and K-12 partners, we heard some concerns around the potential of bifurcating the special education certificate into grade bands. Particularly, we heard from many preparation programs concerns around the capacity of the program to be able to offer bifurcated preparation tracks for special education EC6 versus 6 through 12. And the concern for some programs that they may need to actually not offer a special education 6 through 12 program if there was that bifurcated track. And recognizing the need for high quality special education teachers, that was certainly a risk that we took very seriously. In addition, we also heard from many special education leaders across the state who named that the special education pedagogy is not particularly grade banded, but is really grounded in the foundational needs of the students within the classroom. And that therefore there's an opportunity to really send a clear message to the field around the targeted and intentional support of special education students across the spectrum, from early identification of students with special needs through exit and transition. And so with that has led to the recommendation of the standalone special education specialist EC12 certificate. The second recommended certification pathways is a new proposed core subjects with STR/special education EC6. That's a mouthful of a certificate, Daniel. And the proposed standards that would inform that certificate, special education standards that would inform that certificate would be the special education EC6 standards. That certificate would also be informed by the pedagogy standards and the STR standards and other relevant content standards. The aligned certification exam here would be a new core subjects with special education EC6 exam with an anticipated launch of September of 2026. And the intent of this exam, this certificate and the aligned certification exam really came out of really robust feedback from the field around the real need to streamline preparation and truly certification exams where possible. And so recognizing particularly in EC6, the integrated nature of content preparation and the importance of for our EC6 teachers, many of them are required to take upwards of 5 or 6 certification exams if they're seeking to be fully certified in special education. And so with this, I recognize that there was an opportunity to create a streamlined certification exam, which we've had some early discussions with this with the board previously. Envision an exam that included a number of subtests, and one of those subtests would be special education. And so on one certification exam, the teacher candidate would be able to both demonstrate their mastery of the aligned content standards and special education, ultimately lowering the overall number of certification exams required for the teacher candidate and really streamlining that integrated preparation. The third new certification pathway would be a new proposed deafblind EC12 certification that would implement the new deafblind standards the board adopted, along with a new deafblind certification exam with an anticipated launch in September 2025. And here we anticipate coursework and training requirements would include a specialized practicum similar to the current teachers with students with visual impairment requirements. And again, pretty robust stakeholder engagement here. A really strong deafblind community that's been alongside the agency and other stakeholders throughout the process to make sets of recommendations. I'll pause here before I move on. Holly, I see your hand up. Questions, comments?
Yes, ma'am. So the structure of the new EC core subjects, special ed EC through 6 test of subtests. How many subtests would that be, and how would that be handled in terms of passing? Would candidates be able to retake sections that just the sections they didn't pass, or can you speak a little to that?
Great question. So in terms of overall exam structure, because we recognize with the core subjects exam, that there's a threshold of content or subtests that can be integrated. And so we're working with our testing vendor on setting that exam vision. But we've been working on identifying prioritized subtests related to math, science, social studies, and understanding that there's opportunities to also assess many of our foundational reading practices within the STR exam. So we've been working on that full exam vision, but we have every confidence in our ability to have an appropriate number of subtests and effectively measure all of the relevant educator standards across the core subjects with SPED exam, plus the science of teaching reading exam, plus the pedagogy exam. One of the topics that we'll discuss with the Espec is in the development of this new core subjects of special education EC6 exam. When we're thinking about the requisite subtests, one of the subtests that we will potentially recommend removing from core subjects with special education may be that fine arts health PE subtest. Recognizing that for many educators that those are fields in which they seek to specialize, and that we do have specialized certifications for those areas. So there's a potential proposed exam structure that would remove that subtest, continue to offer the math, science, and social studies, and potentially a very small ELAR subtest, add special education, and then ensure that we had all the requisite content necessary on that STR exam. Does that answer your question?
Then, well, I think so, but about passing those. So how,
I'm
how
sorry.
is that going to be handled?
I was answering your first part.
Okay.
The pass rate would, again, those are opportunities for future engagement with the board. I think our initial recommendation would be to structure pass rates the same way that we do for our other core subjects exams. But again, I think those are other sections of the rule that are opportunities for further engagement and discussion with the board.
And can you remind me how you do handle the passage for the current EC through 6?
Oh gosh, I might need to phone a friend for Dr. Olson.
Oh no, that's fine. I'm just trying to get at, is there an opportunity for someone to just retake the subtest that they didn't pass?
Oh yes, there is an opportunity for folks to just retake those subtests. So, Liz, additional questions on your end?
Yes, so I'm wondering, as you visualize this, are you still thinking the same basic 5-hour testing window? And unlike the core subjects is a little bit different in two ways. First of all, you got to pass currently all 5 of them for it to count. And so the candidates have to do that within 2 attempts, which is very different from, say, the 712 math. The other thing is the fact that there's time limits for each subtest, which doesn't really give candidates that flexibility to have more time maybe in areas where they struggle because it's a fixed account. And it is, I believe, the longest test. And so by, 50 to 100 more questions, so all of these make this an incredibly difficult examination suite. And when you add something as diverse, the social studies content covers basically anything that can be taught in social studies. The same thing for science. Special ed is a very complex and diverse field. So I have some real concerns, and I'm even harking back to the previous EC4 bilingual generalist that ultimately I believe was discarded because no one would take it, because the content was so broad and vast that student candidates weren't successful. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out and see what your initial thoughts are.
No, absolutely, Liz. So we've been working in, we have incredibly robust data on our core subjects exam administration. So we know exactly how much time it takes for candidates to answer each question, and have the opportunity to calibrate number of subtests, calibrate number of questions per subtest, and to ensure that there's adequate time across the entirety of the exam. So I think you'll see that there's strong example of that in the transition from 291 to 391 in terms of the overall number of questions that are asked per subtest, the amount of time that therefore is allocated per question. And we've seen a good evidence in terms of candidate success on 391 that we're on the right path there. So those same thoughts and considerations are certainly will be taken into the development of this new core subjects of special education. It is nowhere in our intent to make this an exam that in any way precludes more educators from becoming special educators. The intent here only is to support the streamlined nature and efficiency of folks seeking this incredibly important certification. I would name that there's also multiple routes here. So I would say that there is still a world in which a candidate could take the regular core subjects and take the special education specialist EC12 if they wanted to be certified in core subjects EC6 and ultimately have that special education certification through 12th grade. So there are multiple options embedded within these pathways. Again, the intent here is really to answer a call from the board and a really persistent call from the field to think about ways to streamline and prioritize and evaluate the most foundational and most critical skills across content area and special education certification. But happy to continue to keep the field updated as we kind of continue to work through the process of developing exam frameworks, developing content, et cetera.
Thank you for that. And I see that Dominique posted a question about these data. And I do think for EPAC to have whatever we're called now, EPS or whatever, for us, I mean, I think that would be helpful in the context of a conversation like this, that data, if that's available for us to see.
Yes, certainly. So I think as we move forward, we can continue to talk with our testing vendors and share relevant context related to exam design as we move forward too. Holly?
Well, can Liz or you, Jessica, clarify the comment Liz made about the difficulty or the constraints with the design of the core subjects test, for example, in terms of retake ability, the limit on the number of retakes? I think, Liz, you said because there are 5 subtests in the current core subjects exam, then they can only retake each of those subtests twice, or can someone please clarify that?
No, so that programs are held accountable for basically the first 2 test attempts on the core subject CC6. So candidates, in order to be considered of having passed the composite, they need to pass each one of the subtests. The positive part around the core subject CC6 is that you can also retake individual subtests. If I've already passed the science, I don't need to go back and retake that. I will also clarify that there's a 5-hour window overall for a candidate to work across those subtests. Well, with that, I did also want to name that there are, while staff will be making some recommendations to the Espec related to the special education certification pathways, there are still additional topics and decision points for stakeholder input and Espec discussion, along with, of course, robust stakeholder discussion around these initial set of proposed decision points. but we think there's additional opportunity related particularly to two big focus areas that the Cedar State leadership team is consistently grappled with. We'd greatly appreciate the opportunity to continue to have these discussions across multiple groups. One is there's been some discussion around.
Jess, I'm sorry for interrupting. Can you name who the Cedar State Working Group is, what that stands for, just for folks on the call who may not know?
Oh yeah, so that's where I named that is the National Technical Assistance Center that we've been collaborating with, who has a specialization in special education, and we've worked to stand up a state leadership team. I'm happy to send as a follow-up to this group who's currently members of that state leadership team.
Thanks, Jess.
So two topics that have been of discussion in the field have been raised by stakeholders, have been raised in the past by board members. They're consistent questions that we get from LEAs and have also been discussions with that state leadership team. First being around coursework and training requirements. One, a discussion regarding, is there a world in which the Espec would require certified teachers to complete or count relevant coursework or training in order to add the special education or deafblind certification via that certification by examination route? Again, I would in no way say that there is any directional recommendation on this front. This is just a topic for future discussion and current and future discussion and engagement. We've heard pretty robust stakeholder feedback on both sides of the fence on this topic, and so look forward to continuing to engage with the board here. The second being around personnel assignments. So really a discussion regarding personnel assignments, including particularly specification regarding required content area certification, particularly for secondary special education assignments. Currently within our special education assignment rules, we specify that the special educator must also hold a content area certification if they are teaching content to students. That has been consistently an area of confusion for LEAs in the field, and has also been an area in terms of implementation that has particularly been challenging in our secondary subject areas. And so that has been a discussion, a secondary topic that we also look forward to continued stakeholder input and feedback. And we'll continue to bring as topics for further, more robust discussion with this group as we move forward. Holly, question on this front?
Yeah, I just wanted to say a word about the topic you just spoke of. The current rules, I thought, required special ed teachers who are teaching content to demonstrate competency in that content, similar to the way the NCLB required for highly qualified, meaning you either have to have certification or you have to have coursework or professional development, a house. I hate to go back down this road with all these acronyms, but it was a vestige of No Child Left Behind. So they're not, I think there's more flexibility there than just having to have the certificate, was my point.
Exactly, Holly. And I think that's where, just to name that for many districts, also implementation of that house requirement has been confusing. As you said, it's a vestige of time gone by. And so I think there's opportunity to potentially further clarify, bring it into 2022 or 2023 language when ultimately the rules are proposed here. But again, thinking about a consistent focus, I think, and it really related to both of these focus areas, is recognizing where are there opportunities for flexibility, recognition of needs of LEAs on the ground, while also recognizing the importance of having that the knowledge and skills necessary to be an effective special educator. So just recognizing that those kind of two tensions are always top of mind in stakeholder discussions on these topics. So as we move forward to put on this group's radar, at the September meeting, we will be bringing 2 discussion items for the board's discussion. So just to sort of name, we will set the context of this overall pathway, and then just dive into 2 discussion items that will be inclusive of these special education recommendations, but will also include some other areas of rulemaking. Specifically in Chapter 230C, the addition of these new proposed certification exams into the rule and specification around last operational dates for the current certification exams. And then in Chapter 233, the addition of these new proposed certificates. So again, these are the only two areas where rulemaking is being discussed at this time, recognizing that there's further areas to discuss related to the special education pathway moving forward. But codifying these, the certification exam and the certificate in rule first allows the board the opportunity to continue to get engaged on these topics of discussion. Donna, questions on your end?
Yes, sorry, will you just clarify for me, is this a standard certificate or a supplemental?
Great question. So the way that this has been proposed is that this would be a the special education, both of the, actually, let me pull back, all three of the certificates would be, well, I'm sorry, the special education specialist and core subjects with STR and special education EC6 would be standalone certificates. The deafblind EC12 certificate would be recommended as a supplemental certificate, recognizing the need for foundational experience in other fields.
Okay, thank you. And so does that mean you'll be doing away with the special ed supplemental that currently exists?
That is the proposed pathway at this time, recognizing that the special education standalone and the special education supplemental we're essentially measuring the same content. They just had different numbers of questions on them and were implemented in different ways. And so the special education supplemental, therefore, then only allowed you to teach special education in the areas in which you had your base content area certification. In an actual implementation, though, they functioned almost identically. And so we recognized there was also, we got some good feedback from stakeholders around to some degree, the perception around holding a special education supplemental certificate versus the special education EC12 certificate. And so realizing it's also the intent behind this name, special education specialist, recognizing that the role of our special educators is truly requires specialized knowledge and skills. And so wanting to ensure that all who receive that certificate had that acknowledgement.
Thank you. It does bring back some terrible memories for me about recommendation with Edtpa. You know I was going to go there. So I'm hoping, I know Edtpa isn't currently adopted, but I'm assuming you all are thinking about that if it's going to move forward.
Absolutely, Donna. So as the board continues to discuss next steps around performance assessment, we'll certainly keep all those considerations and more nuanced implementation next steps in mind. With that, just to share with you all an update on the current and future exam development. We did launch in January of this year the updated ELAR 4 through 8 certification exam, and do anticipate in September of 2023 launching the updated ELAR 712 exam, and as well as a physical education redesigned exam. Looking to 2024, launching an updated health certification exam, and then we've codified here September 2025, the launch of that special education specialist and deafblind exam, and 2026, the redesigned core subjects with special education exam. I'll name that two certification fields that have been consistently in the to be determined bucket have been the ESL supplemental and a bilingual supplemental. I'll name staff wishes we could start the process of developing those exams a while ago. But really here, we want to ensure that there's always a guidance from the board has been ensure alignment with expectations and K-12 standards. And we recognize that there's pretty robust effort underway to reconceptualize and redesign the ELPs. And so we want to ensure that any certification exam that's being developed is not automatically outdated because it's not inclusive of the appropriate K-12 standards. And so those are, we recognize how pressing those fields are, but want to ensure that we're including the appropriate content. And I would name that as we go forward, we do intend to continue to engage stakeholders to think about opportunities to engage in the same type of streamlined implementation as we are recommending with special education. So some examples that we will float to the Espec as potentials for consideration may be a course subject with ESL certification exam. So imagine, rather than that special education subtest, could you include an ESL subtest that allowed for one certification exam that it then therefore certifies the educator in both? So again, thinking about presenting some of those more streamlined certification exam options that have been a long-standing discussion with the board. With that, I will turn it back over to Christy to touch base on meeting updates.
Thanks, Jess. And this is really quick, and then I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Olafson to respond to some questions that have come in. This is the anticipated next date would be October 21st. I appreciate all of y'all's flexibility. As you know, that we try to anticipate 2 weeks following an Espec meeting, but sometimes some of the directives that are given, or if we're still getting more feedback or items are still more fluid. So thank you for the flexibility there. Depending on which route we go, the Espec goes with the configuration. This is something else that we can talk about is, does this work? Is there something else better that works for y'all that, anyway, but just wanted to put this out here this is what we've got standing right now. So, okay, Holly's got a question.
Sorry. Well, I guess it just kind of reminded me, what is the plan, since we all wrote our thoughts in the chat, Christy, how is that going to be presented? I know Espec wanted to hear what we thought about being reconfigured. And so are you guys going to just take the script from the chat and give it to them, or what's the plan?
Yeah, I'm just going to really transfer it from the script and just, Holly Eaton, this is what she wants. And this is why I'm not going to summarize. I'm going to put it all out there and let them, look at that. I know there was a couple of questions about, defining consumers and Robert's rule. So there's some of these other things that I'm going to also make sure that I've clarified that you all had asked for, specific guidance on or for consideration. And I'll make sure that that's embedded as well. And then, so that will be part of the actual agenda item. You will see that in the book, as well as we'll be presenting on that at the September meeting. And then whatever direction that the board gives, then we'll circle back and let y'all know what the next steps will be. So from there, I think we're ready to move on to the EPAC member questions. And the first one is Dr. Olafson. So I'm going to shut up and let him talk his brilliance.
Thanks so much, Christy. So we did get a question just to provide a little bit more information about the upcoming clinical experience reporting. So as we noted earlier this morning, forthcoming update about the data gathered for clinical experiences. Do want to, we've got a few things to keep in mind. This reporting won't start until October. So right now, preparation programs are finishing all of their annual reporting, getting all of their ACEP data and all that sort of stuff. We didn't want to confuse the issue, so we're going to let all of that finish. And then this data collection will open up in our IT update in October. And EPPs will be reporting information about those clinical experiences in 2022, 2023. There are a number of supports that are planned that are on their way. Some have already started. We will have a webinar showing sort of a close walkthrough demonstration of how this new reporting works. We'll do that closer to the actual screen going live. So we'll do that in October. Also, starting in this week's newsletter, we will start providing information about this reporting to preparation programs. We'll be updating our reporting manual. We always get a refresh of the manual on September, I want to say 16th, after the reporting year is done. So we'll have that into our manual. And we'll also be providing templates for the upload option for this. So we do have planned a number of supports and communications to the field about this specifically. On our next slide, just kind of like high level stuff, the reporting will happen in a new screen. There will be an upload option and an individual option aligned with many of the other data reporting options that we have available for y'all in ECOS. The reporting will be for the first year will be for 22-23. And of course, like all other sort of like annually reported data, that will be due by 9/15 of 23. But of course, like all other reported data, we will be heartily encouraging preparation programs to report this data throughout the year, especially because it is a new collection and may, just the learning piece there. And as I noted previously, we'll be removing duplicative information from the observation screen. So we'll actually make observation reporting a lighter weight. Only information about the individual observation will be input on that observation reporting instead of information about the assignment. Our next slide, just this is a little in the weeds, but I wanted to be as transparent as we could on this. So for the clinical teaching collection, these are the data elements that'll be about that clinical teaching experience. And what I've highlighted here are new pieces. These are pieces that have not previously been collected about clinical teachers. They include the cooperating teacher name, the cooperating teacher TEA ID. And as a reminder, that TEA ID will be optional this first year. Educators can go, as soon as they log into ECOS, they are presented with their TEA ID. Educators have to log into ECOS in order to renew certificates, all that fun stuff. But we recognize and heard from the field that that's going to take a little bit of getting used to. And so it is optional here in the first year. And then the second piece that is new on the clinical teaching is this, the assignment location, the district or charter where that clinical teaching is happening. On the next slide, for our intern collection, as was previously pointed out, we already collect most of this information for interns. So the only new piece here is that information about the assigned mentor teacher. We do, by the way, just important to note, we do have opportunities, and we'll share it in the training, about if there's 2 cooperating teachers or if there are 2 mentor teachers, how do we do that reporting? We have solved for that, and we'll go into specifics on that, but we are allowing for that because we know that a lot of preparation programs may have multiple clinical teachers or cooperating teachers and mentor teachers. But so this is the new piece related to internships. And again, the TEA ID, because we know that that's new, it'll be optional in this first year. Of course, we're encouraging preparation programs to get it and report it, but we will have that be optional in the first year. And then on the third screen, if you are supporting non-teachers or non-teacher certificates in a practicum, counselors, principals, you name it. So we will be gathering this information. Again, most of this is already reported. We can do those observations. We're taking it out of observations, putting it into a one-time entry. And the only new piece here is that site supervisor name. And again, the TEA ID will be optional in the first year. So these are the, that's what that collection is going to look like. As I noted, we will have additional supports, newsletter, webpage, webinar. You better believe it. But just wanted to share with this group because we did have the question coming up for more information about it. I don't remember if there's a next slide. Oh yeah, any other questions related to that collection? All right, thanks so much. Christy, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, so thank you all for submitting those questions. It really does help staff to make sure that we can show up and give you whatever you need regarding the agenda items. With that concludes our show, but wanted to kind of give a minute, especially since we have some extra time. Are there any other outstanding questions that you want to pose to the group, or something for future consideration? Just wanted to hand it off to y'all and see if there's anything else in your mind that you want to share. Donna.
If I could just ask one more clarifying question about the special ed exam, and I think this is probably just rumor or discussion, but Jessica, there had been talk about particularly the VI and maybe DepEd exam not being an option for cert by exam only. So is there any discussion about that for the new special ed exam, or will it still be an option for if I get core subjects or a content standard certificate, then I get out the special ed specialist by exam only?
That's a great question, Donna. So for the special education certificates that are going to be put to the board for discussion, we'll name that there's opportunity for future discussion and rulemaking related to those requirements. And given that we want to also engage with the board around a discussion around if they would, if similar to, let's say, the EC3 certification exam, where there's a requirement that candidates take certain additional coursework or training before being able to sit for that certification exam. So that will be future discussion with the board. And then Donna, can you say the first part of your question again related to visual impairment and deaf and hard of hearing certification? Was there something that you were also wondering about there?
Well, I just I know there are only 2 programs that have the TVI program, but I know there had been some discussion about that not being an option as a cert by exam. So I was wondering, just based on the deaf ed, we're currently not a deaf ed program. We do have a program, but not a certification program. So I was just wondering about that.
I believe that our TVI program does not allow for certification by exam, but let me go back in and check in our rules related to deaf and hard of hearing. I feel like I've been deep in those for a while, but I'm getting things mixed up. But I would say that there's also will be a discussion given the close connection between our deaf blind, the proposed certification pathway there, and TVI, that would also be, again, a future discussion with the Espec around potentially not allowing that to be a certification by exam field.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Andrea?
Could you clarify for me how the shortage areas are determined? Is there data behind that we can look at, or how does that work for y'all? I know you submit them to the federal government, right?
Yeah, I'll let Dr. Olson address that one.
Yep, thanks for the question. So for our determination of teacher shortage areas, we utilize a number of pieces of information because, as you know, we don't collect information about specific vacancies in schools, and so we don't have that information. But what we do use is we identify the number of emergency permits by grade level and subject area. We utilize the information about teachers teaching out of field, and we also utilize the information about uptake into the field. So certified people then getting employed in their first year, with the understanding, with sort of the framework there that if people, if a very large percentage of the people who are get that certificate immediately get hired, that's a high demand area. So we utilize those pieces of information, bring them together, and then provide that information to the feds.
Okay, so for bilingual education, there's not a waiver for that, right? It's something else. It's an exception. Like, do you have waiver data on some of these that you use too, or no?
I can't speak to waiver policy. I don't know it well. I'm looking to somebody else at TEA about certification waivers.
I was just wondering if that was a piece that was in there too, because I know that they submit specific what they're requesting a waiver for when it applies to certification.
So
yeah, federally, you can't waive bilingual or SPED requirements. I can, if you have a more specific question, if you don't mind emailing it to me, Andrea, I'm happy to get Marilyn to connect with you. She's not on our call today, but she's our subject matter expert in that area for sure.
Okay. Yeah, I thought that you could do a waiver for ESL. I know you can't for bilingual and special ed, but I'll follow up with y'all. Thank you.
Holly, question?
Well, yes, I have a question, but I also wanted to respond to Andrea. So you can get a waiver from TEA under current TEA rules for certification for bilingual special ed. It's in chapter 89 of the TEA rules. But you have to have, it's called an exception, but you have to have plans in place and professional development in place and support in place for getting those folks certified or bringing in more certified folks. But it's true that under federal law, you have to, special ed and bilingual certification is required. Now I forgot my question. Oh, I know what it was. On cert by exam, since this subject has come up several times, Jessica, is that something within Espec's purview to decide, or would that have to be a statutory change?
Just globally in terms of cert by exam, Holly, or in terms of, no, so that is within the Espec's purview, unless otherwise specified in statute. So for example, for EC3, there was a specific provision in the statute that said that there was a requirement of additional coursework. But other than that, that is those are provisions that the board can outline what there's currently within 230. Oh man, this is where Maryland needs to be here. I believe 230G, but I will go back and check. That specifies certification fields in which you are not allowed to certify via exam.
Okay, because in my experience, it's always been a statutory decision.
If I can just chime in, when it comes to visual impairments, you are correct, Holly. It is in 210485 that says if you teach any students. So to Jessica's point, is that if it doesn't name it specifically, that it is in the board's purview, but like for the deaf blind, there are going to be limitations there since statute is pretty clear.
Yeah, the board traditionally follows statute regarding fields to not include within cert by exam, but that doesn't mean that the board can make decisions in addition based on data. Meredith Lee.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. I was curious about the adjustment for the accommodation for staff retention from 95% to 85%. I'd just love to know how you landed on 85%.
Yep, thanks for the question. So we modeled this at a number of different levels and kind of have the understanding that we're trying to identify only those top performers. We modeled it at 95, 90, 85, 80, and found that at 85, we consistently had sort of like 1 to 5 preparation programs reach that level. That's similar to what we have in kind of some other indicators there. And so when we brought it to the board, that's where we landed. I also wanted to take this opportunity to just say, previously, Holly had asked me the question about like 10 students and under. We also did model that. That wasn't just a number that we picked out of blue. We modeled that at 5, 10, and 20, and we're looking to try and minimize the number of people that had like real classes that were excluded, but try to exclude kind of like those kind of like extremes in small numbers. So I kind of gave a off the cuff answer there, but wanted to note that we also engaged in that work. I think my team would be mad at me if they're like, no, Mark, we did that work. So wanted to make sure I noted that.
Dr.
Thank
Oliver,
Mark.
where would we find that information? Is there a link you can drop in the chat that helps us to see that?
Related to the end size and that modeling?
Yes.
Oh, that's just work we've done. We haven't published. We didn't publish that work. We can follow up later and I can kind of show that. We do publish the overall data set from 1819, but that was just internal modeling. So I don't have a link on that.
Thanks.
Liz?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up, Mark, on a comment you just said that you did the modeling and it was like 1 to 5 EPPs that kind of like in conjunction with the other awards or the other commendations that the numbers fell out to where between 1 and 5 EPPs would meet that criteria. And I think, and forgive me if I'm putting words in someone's mouth, but I think after one Espec meeting, Jessica and Emily and I were talking about commendations about how, you know, being if there's only 5 when there's more than 120 EPPs, you know, and you miss that by, you know, small percentage points, you know, that's very difficult. And that's, again, why I keep bringing up the suggestion that we look at kind of performance over time, consistent high level performance, because when you're just taking the top, you know, up to say 5 programs, that makes it look like we got the first time pass rate a couple of years ago. Well, our numbers are small, so one candidate can swing us out of that range. But I believe we are consistently preparing candidates to pass at a high rate. So can you elaborate a little more on modeling for just such an exclusive set?
Yep. So I would note that we preparation programs can get commendations, and there's a lot of different commendations, right, that are opportunities here. And so it's not just 5 programs that get a commendation in a given year. It's, I don't even remember how many distinct programs had had a commendation this year.
I think last year it was close to a third of EPPs received a commendation in one or more areas.
Thank you for that, Emily. So we do have a lot of opportunities for preparation programs to get a commendation in these different areas. And so ultimately, you know, if we're, I note that you're noting like 5 out of 120, but when we look at it more broadly, if we are awarding, you know, over 30 programs a commendation, that actually does highlight in the field a number of different programs with this recognition. However, I do appreciate your push around the longitudinal view. And I think that, as I noted, we will continue to take a look at that.
Mark, can you also comment on the group size and the looking at trends over 3 years when we're talking about, you know, the idea that one candidate can swing programs, and just there's a nuance there I think would be helpful for the group.
Absolutely. So, you know, this is always a balance with how do we make sure that we, you know, aren't down to all the way small numbers. So we use the same small group aggregation procedure when we're doing our commendations than when we do our accountability system, right? So we use up to 3 years data to try to get 10 folks in there in order to do that measurement there. So that is another way that we do try to get just additional people into the data set there.
Well, that was, I wanted to give a pause to make sure that everyone felt really good about the work that we've done. If there's anything else that comes up, please feel free to send us an email. We will be in contact. We will have this, you know, uploaded on the website no later than early next week. I know that we have to go kind of through some steps for some accessibilities and, you know, IT, but it should be uploaded by early next week. We'll be circling back with you all after the September meeting with what the board has directed staff to do on the configuration of this group. But with that, we wish you all a great Friday, and we have just gifted you back 20 minutes of your Friday. So y'all have a great day. Thanks you all.
Bye everybody. Have a great weekend.